disgust, a scale sampling 7 domains of disgust electors, elicitors. Elicitors. Summary. We describe the development of a reliable measure of individual differences in disgust sensitivity. The 32 item disgust scale includes two true, false, and two disgust rating items for each of 7 domains. For a domain of magical thinking via similarity and conjugation that cuts across the 7 domains of elicitors. Correlation with other skills provide initial evidence and convergent and discriminant validity. The discussed scale correlates moderately with sensation seeking, with fear of death, correlates weakly with neuroticism, psychoticism, and correlates negligibly with self monitoring and ISNAC personality questionnaire extroversion and lie scales. What? Females score higher than male on disgust scale. Okay. We suggest that the 7 domains of disgust elicitors all have in common that they remind us of our animality, and specifically of our morality. Thus, we see disgust as a defense emotion that maintains and emphasizes the line between human and animal. What? That makes no sense. Okay, if that's the case, then why? Okay, anyways. Introduction. In this paper, we present a reliable measure of individual differences in discussed sensitivity, together with initial evidence of convergent and discriminant validity. The domains of discussed illustrators included on the 32 item discussed scale and their intercorrelation offer support for theory of disgust, first proposed by Rosen and Fallon, 1987, in which disgust is a defense against the recognition of human animality. Okay. It has generally been agreed from Darwin onwards that the disgust basically is about rejecting foods. Evidence for the centrality of food includes the facial expression, which focuses on oral expulsion, and closing of the nears, and psychological concomitants of nausea and gagging, which has the effect of terminating eating. Rosen, Fallon, 1987. Even the etymology of the English word disgust means bad taste. Darwin, 1987 to 1965, held that disgust refers to something revolting, primarily in relation to the sense of taste, as actually perceived or vividly imagined, and is secondary to anything which causes a similar feeling through a sense of smell, touch, and even eyesight. Other authors have drawn the same conclusion, framing disgust as a rejection response focused on eating. Consider disgust as an effect that is a luxury. 2. And competing with hunger drive. The only major theorist who did not see disgust as food-related emotion was Freud, 1905 to 1953, who held that disgust was primarily related to sex and serving to restrict polymorphous childhood sexuality to the narrow class of accepted adult objects. The classic treatment of disgust is by the classic treatment of disgust is by Angyal, 1941, who defined disgust as revo- revolution, revulsion at oral incorporation. Angyal noted that the principal eliciting stimulus are body wastes, with feces as the most powerful elicitor. Hence, Angyal, while still focusing on oral incorporation, invoked excreta as opposed to food as the primal stimulus. Rosen and Fowler, 1987, extended Angyal's approach by defining disgust as revulsion at the prospect of oral incorporation of an obsessive revulsion at the prospect of an oral incorporation of an offensive substance. The object, the offensive objects are contaminants that is, if they have been briefly contact with any acceptable food. Offensive objects are contaminated, but that is if they have even that that is if they even briefly contact an acceptable food. They tend to render that food unacceptable. Note that this framing of disgust take it away from what is most certainly its cyclogenic precursor, the rejection of bad taste in food, called distaste by Rosen and Fallon, 1980. The disgust rejection is not primarily based on taste, but rather on knowledge of the nature or origin of potential food that taste bad, do not necessarily have property of contamination. Things that taste bad do not necessarily have property of contamination. Okay. For example, dipping a disliked vegetable in and out of a bowl of soup would not render the soup undrinkable for most people. Okay. Dipping a sterilized cock ranch. Okay, dude. What? Dipping a sterilized cockroach into this. What? Sterilizing a Okay. Dipping a sterilized cockroach into the soup generally has more dramatic effect. Disgust rejection has been shown to follow two lays. Oh my god. Disgust rejection have been shown to follow the two laws of sympathetic magic. Sympathetic magic. Okay. A lot of magic, which were first proposed by Taylor 1887, 1871 to 1974. Whoa, okay. Fraser 1990, 1959, and Mouse 1902 to 1972. This Taylor guy outlived him. The law of contagion. Once in contact, always in contact, refers to the tendency to act as if brief contact cause a permanent transfer of properties from one object to another. Okay, alright. Even when there is no material substance transferred. Some people, for example, reported that they would not drink from a glass that was once held to dog feces. Shit, no, sorry. Some people, for example, reported that they would not drink from a glass that once held dog feces, no matter how many times the glass is scrubbed and sterilized. Rosen, Millman, blah, 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 1986. Rosen, Lemfoff, 1990. The second law, the law of similarity, holds that the image equals the object. For example, a piece of chocolate fudge becomes far less desirable when it is shaped like dog feces. Okay. This brief review leads to the conclusion that disgust is, at its core, an oral defense. Disgust acts as a kind of guardian of the mouth, protecting against the oral incorporation of offensive or contaminated food, where the principal contaminants to be avoided are the waste products of human or animal bodies. Yet in our American SS and in other cultures, we have examined the revulsion associated with disgust extends far beyond this food-related core. Gore and dismemberment of the human body often elicits disgust, as does a range of sexual acts, specifically incest. When we began our research, it was not clear to us how many domains discuss there were, nor did we know the extent to which individual differences in discuss sensitivity might be domain specific. Development of the preliminary discuss scale. There is currently no good measure of discuss sensitivity. Rosen, Fallon, and Mandel 1984 developed a scale to measure concerns about food contaminants. Example, reluctance to drink soup stirred by a thoroughly washed fly swatter. Ugh. Has found substance correlation among parents and their children. Oh no. Davy Foster Mayway 1993 used the same scale and replicated the findings of significant parent-child correlation. The scale is not suitable as a general discuss scale. However, Bruner and Corrigate 1984 developed a scale to measure attitudes about body products and body elimination. Example, the smell of other person's bowel movements bother me. This scale is also limited to one kind of discuss elicitor, and it was developed on a relatively small pool. However, Templer et al. Found a number of demographic correlatives of the scale that will be of interest in our results. They found that women and younger people show stronger negative attitudes to body products, and they found a relation between strong and negative attitudes and anxiety based psychopathology. Higher scores on the scale also scored high on measures of neuroticism, observedness, and psychasthenia. 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 Our goal, oh my god, our first goal in skill development was was to discern the kind of domains of experience in which Americans experience disgust. That is, what should a disgust scale ask about? Early theorists cite above have pointed to issues surrounding food, body products, and sex. Rather than limiting our scale to these three domains, however, we chose to begin in a more empirical fashion by asking an ad hoc panel of informants about what they found disgusting. We asked 15 students and 5 secretaries at the University of Pennsylvania to describe the three most disgusting experiences of their life, and then to list as many disgusting things as they could think of. This open-ended inquiry yielded a total result of 221 descriptions of disgusting objects and actions. Foods, body products, and sexuality were well represented, accounting for 57% of all descriptions. There were, however, 5 additional domains of disgust suggested. The largest of these domains, with 13% of all descriptions, involved gore, surgery, punctured wounds, deformities, Jesus Christ, deformities, and other situations in which the normal exterior envelope of the body is breached or altered. Normal exterior. Okay. We refer to this fourth domain as envelope violations. The fifth domain, 6% descriptions, involve repulsive people whose actions were not necessarily linked to the physical body. Ooh, ooh, spicy. As was characteristics of the first 5 domains, we refer to this domain as socio-moral violation, and is included, for example, Nazis, drunk drivers, hypocrites, and lawyers who chase am- ambulances. The sixth domain, 6% of the descriptions, refer to disgust in animals, mostly insects. The seventh domain, 4% of the descriptions, involve concerns relating to dirt, germs, and hygiene, really just hygiene. The eighth domain was very small, involving contact with dead humans and animal bodies. Death. 13% of responses were uncodable without additional information. Example, genetic engineering. Okay. These 8 domains, food, sex, body, and these 8 domains, food, sex, body parts, envelope violation, socio-moral violations, animal hygiene, and death, were all part of the concoction to create the Powerpuff Girls, served as the heuristic in the representation of broad range of the discussed elicitors in our scale. Recognize that our division of the open-ended description would have been possible And we did not assume the psychological distinctiveness of these eight domains. Rather, we left the status of these domains as an empirical question to address in the course of the item analysis. Toward this end, we tried to write down some of the items to represent each domain separately. We encountered some difficulty here, as many of the items drawn from the open description implicated multiple domains. In the end, we included items that taught more than one domain, multiple domain items, and items that represented as best we could only one domain, domain specific items. Another issue for scale development concerned the format of the questions to be written. Individuals may differ significantly in their use of the term disgust, just as they differ in their understanding of the meaning of the treat words such as intelligent or dominion. For instance, some individuals might call socio-moral violators, example Nazis, disgusting, whereas others, no less negative toward such violators, might not extend the term so far from domains of which difference in sensitivity to a particular discuss illustrator. What? Thus we could not depend entirely on which differences in sensitivity to a particular discuss elicitor. Because some people did not find Nazis to be disgusting. Thus we could not depend entirely on the question asking respondents to rate how disgusting they found a particular situation or experience. This concern led us to write items in two different formats, appear on two separate pages of our initial questionnaire. The first page presented 54 true and false questions about personal reactions and behaviors that were described without any reference to disgust. These questions were drawn from all of the eight domains identified above and were in intended to prove actual avoidance behaviors. I avoid touching the doorknob in public spaces, as well as effective reactions to potential disgust elicitors. I find some body odor sexually stimulating. Reverse scored. The second page presented respondents with descriptions of 53 potential disgusting situations, again drawn from all eight domains. Respondents were asked to rate each description on a 3-point scale of not disgusting at all, slightly disgusting, or very disgusting. Very disgusting. Very disgusting. This initial questionnaire was given to 54 undergraduates at the University of Pennsylvania. For each respondent, a total score was calculated as the sum of the personal reaction subtotal number of disgust sensitive responses and the disgust rating subtotal sums of disgust rating. Items which were low item total correlation were eliminated, as were items for which more than 90% of respondents gave the same responses. 78 items were retained. An additional 53 items were then written to obtain approximately equal numbers of domain-specific items for each of the eight domains. In both of the true, false, and discuss rating formats, the second questionnaire, 136 items, was given to 126 undergraduates at the University of Pennsylvania and to 37 employees of the U.S. Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. Again, items that did not correlate with total scores were dropped, as were domain-specific items that showed low item domain correlation, and items that showed low variance. 60 6 items were retained for the preliminary discuss questionnaire. Results of the preliminary studies presented two surprises. First, we found that the socio-moral items, example stealing from a blind beggar, did not reliably correlate with total score. The only moral items that did correlate reliably with total score were those that dealt with sexuality. Example, questions about the morality of homosexuality, incest, and bestiality. These results led us to combine the sexual morality items with sexual behavior items in a domain now called simply sex, and drop the socio-moral domain. The second surprise was the items about contact with death produced some of the highest correlation with total score. We had expected items representing the death domain to be only marginally useful because this was one of the smallest domains in the open-ended discussion descriptions, and because the scholarly literature has said little about a link between disgust and death. The success of death items in our preliminary studies led to include a measure of fear of death in one of the main studies to be reported below. In addition to the two surprises that the preliminary studies offered some assurance. The correlation of two subscales based on true or false items and discuss rating items were substantial. The pattern of the items correlation suggested that although items format did control some variance, the variance was relatively small. We determined to continue with both formats in order to make possible a reliable estimate for the total score that could include generationalized across formats. Thus, the product of our preliminary studies was a 66-item preliminary discuss questionnaire with items representing 7 domains of discuss elicitors: food, animals, body products, thanks, body envelopes, violations, death, and hygiene. For each domain, we included 2 to 5 domain-specific items in each of the 2-item formats. We also included a number of items that span multiple domains and that showed a high correlation with total score in the preliminary studies. There were 37 true or false items on the page and 29 discuss rating items on page 2. About 1/3 of the true false items were reverse scored. This 66 item preliminary discuss questionnaire was further refined to a 32 item discuss scale on the basis of research reported below. Overview, method, overview, and specific hypotheses. 4 samples, including students and non-student respondents, contributed to a section of a 32-item discuss scale to an assessment of the reliability of homogeneity of this scale across 7 domains identified above. One of the samples also provided evidence about the relation between discuss scale and the 7 personality scale relevant to the conversion of discriminant validity. We think of disgust as a defensive emotion. Method. Overview and specific hypothesis. 4 samples, including students and non-student respondents, contributed to the selection of 32 items, discuss scale, and to an assessment of the reliability of homogeneity of the scale across 7 domains, classified above. when the samples also provided evidence about the relation between the disgust scale and seven personality scale relevant to the convergent and discriminant validity. We think of disgust as a defense emotion, a defensive emotion. As mentioned above, found a relation between anxiety and attitudes towards body elimination. We therefore predict that more disgust sensitive respondents would score higher on the Yersnich personality questionnaire. Yersnich personality questionnaire. Yersnich personality questionnaire. Neuroticism scale, where individuals with higher scores are described as anxious and worrying, reacting too strongly to all sort of stimuli. Another convergent validity prediction stems from our findings in the preliminary study that items about death were very good predictors of disgust sensitivity. Rosen and Fallon, 1987, suggested that disgust serves to emphasize the distinction between humans and animals, and morality is a powerful thread to that distinction. People with greater fear of death may have a greater need to employ the defensive emotion of disgust. In order to emphasize the line between humanity and animality, scores on the disgust should therefore correlate with scores on the fear or death scale. What? In order to emphasize the line between humanity and animality, somebody got it. Scores on the disgust scale should therefore correlate with scores on the fear of death scale. Boyer, 1964. An 18-item scale measuring the concerns about various aspects of death and dying. Sensitivity should be inversely related to the sensation seeking. Zuckerman, 1979. Disgust sensitivity. Disgust sensitive people should be very wary of new foods. Sexual activities, drugs, or any other unusual experience that would correlate negatively or any other unusual experience that puts the temple of the body at risk, either of death or defilement. We predict that disgust sensitivity would correlate negatively with experience seeking subscale, measuring desire for new experience through the mind and senses, and negatively with thrill and adventure seeking subscale, measure desire to engage in exciting but dangerous physical activities of Zuckerman 1979, sentence seeking scale form B. The correlation predictions thus far are part of the strategy of convergent validation. In contrast, the correlation predicted thus far are part of a strategy. The correlation predicted thus far are part of a strategy of convergent validation. In contrast, discrimination. Oh my. The correlation predicted thus far are part of a strategy of convergent validation. In contrast, discriminant validation calls for predictions of weak, non-significant correlation between discussed scale measures it represents constructs other than specific sensitivities to discuss. What? One possibility is that discussed scales measure only general tendencies to respond to events emotionally. To control for this possibility, a four-item emotionality subscale was embedded within the 66 discussed items of the preliminary questionnaire, in which SS were asked true or false whether they were more fearful, emotional, easily angered, or easily embarrassed than most people. If the if the disgust scale measured something more specific than general emotionality, then self-reports of emotionality shows at most weak correlation with disgust sensitivity. A second possibility is that disgust scales measure self-presentational concerns, and respondents' answers reflect how they want to be perceived by themselves or others. This possibility seemed especially plausible because the preliminary discuss scale included a number of personally revealing questions. Example: I would enjoy performing oral sex on someone I love. To provide discriminant validity on this point, we predict that this dust scale would not correlate with two scales assessing self person presentation presentational concerns. The self-monitoring scale, Cindy 1974, and the large scale EQ 1975. In addition to these specific discriminant validity predictions, we saw no reason to expect correlation between the disgust scale and either the psychotism and extroversion scale of the EPQ, or between the disgust scale and the disinhibition subscale, measuring the desire for disinhibition and excitement in the social sphere, or the boredom susceptibility subscale, measuring an aversion from repetitive or repetition or routine of any kind. Zuckerman 1979. Sensation seeking scale. Within the 66 discussed items, we include 9 additional items designed to assist in quality control and validation. 4 catch questions were included, which were written to elicit predictable responses from any respondent paying attention. Example: false for I could never touch money with my bare hands. Also included or four items emotionally scale already described. And finally, there was a single true or false asking this respondent directly whether or not she is more sensitive to disgust than most people. We predicted a significant positive correlation between this item and the disgust scale. Respondents, for example, four samples of respondents completed the preliminary disgust questionnaire. The college I sample was composed of 182 students in For example, four samples of respondents completed the preliminary disgust questionnaire. The college sample was composed of 182 students in a social psychology class at the University of Pennsylvania who volunteered to complete the discussed questionnaire. 83% of the total class, 61% female, mean age, who volunteered to complete the questionnaire. Four samples of the respondents completed four samples of the Four samples of the respondents completed the preliminary discuss questionnaire. The college sample was composed of 182 students in a social studies class at the University of Pennsylvania who volunteered to complete the discuss questionnaire. 83% of the total class, 61%, were female, and the average age 19. The college sample was 126 psychology students at the University of Pennsylvania who were fulfilling a research participant requirement. 54 of them were female, and on average 19. The psych plant sample was 170 psych physical plant workers at the University of Pennsylvania, 36 female, on average age of 40, means years of education 12.2, covering a range of blue-collar occupations. The four prof samples was 46 people conference food processing professionals. In terms of social class, as noted, we included four catch questions to eliminate respondents who were not paying attention or were not following instruction. One of these, rating whether it is disgusting to burn your mouth on very spicy soup, was dropped because 42% of the psych plant samples rated burning one's mouth as at least slightly disgusting, yet their responses to other items did not differ from their responses of the other 58% of the sample. The remaining three catch questions appear to be more effective at screening out careless SS, and the respondents who failed any of these questions was eliminated. The number of respondents dropped from the college 2, college and psych plan and food prof samples were 4 to 2 to 61 and 30 respectively. We believe that the large number dropped from the psych plan sample is attributable to a lesser familiarity with questionnaires and lower level of reading skills in this sample. Our results are based on the remaining 454 respondents, 221 male and 229 female, and 4 unknown. Procedure: respondents in the college psych plan food prof sample completed only the disgust questionnaire. In the college 1 and food prof sample, the respondents answered the disgust questionnaires in a single 10-minute testing session at the beginning of the lecture. For the psych plan sample questionnaire, in a, for second blank envelopes containing discussed questionnaires were distributed to physical plant staffs. They reported for work in the morning. They were given $1 if they returned the form sealed in the envelope. For the College 2 sample, respondents were tested in 4 group sessions in which each respondent was given a packet of questionnaires and asked to fill them out in this order. The EPQ respondents were given, and finally the self-monitoring results. Discuss items on the first page of the questionnaire were a 0 or 100. 100s were discuss sensitivity answer, i.e., except for 13 reverse scored items. Discussed items on the second page of the questionnaire were scored 0, not disgusting. 50, slightly disgusting. 100, very disgusting. For each respondent, 2 scores were calculated, a mean of the 37 personal reaction items and a mean of the 29 disgust rating items. Scores thus range from 0 to 100 and represented the percentage of the maximum possible scores obtained by each respondent. The means and SD were substantially similar across the four samples, although the mean for the psych plan sample was higher than the other samples. Mean personal reaction scores for the college 1, college 2, college psych plant, and food prof samples were 44, 40, 54, and 44 respectively, and standard deviations range from 15 to 18. Mean disgust rating scores were 45, 44, 55, and 45, with standard deviations ranging from 14 to 19. Also notable was a similarity across the four samples in mean responses to each of the 66 discussed items. For each sample, we computed a list of 66 mean ratings. Then for each of the 6 possible pairings of 4 samples, we computed the person correlation of the 66 pairs of ratings. These 6 correlations range from 0.77 to 0.97, with a mean of 0.86, indicating that the 4 samples had subsequently similar ideas about the relative disgustness of the 66 items. The overall similarity of the results across the samples lead us to present below some results for the 4 samples combined. Most importantly, the correlation of the personal reaction score with the disgust score remained mostly important, and the correlation between personal reaction score with the disgust and rating score was 0.61, 0.68, 0.61, and 0.67. For the 4 samples, respectively, the substantial convergence of the scores using 2 kinds of items format confirms similar results in the preliminary studies, but the correlation between the scores was consistently less than the reliability of each score separately. For the 4 groups, between scores were consistently less reliable for each separately for the group. Between scores was consistently less reliable for the group. Con branch in alpha range from 0.782 and 0.85 on the personal reaction score, and from 0.85 to 0.92 on the disgust rating scores. Thus, items format does not appear to control some variance in response to the other questionnaires. We determined on the basis of these results to include both kinds of items in our final scale, in order to avoid conflating items with disgust sensitivity. Item analysis selection of the 32 items discussed scale. As described in the method section, we tried to write down domain-specific items for each of the 7 elicitors domains in order to explore the extent to which disgust sensitivity might be different across domains. We therefore selected 4 items to represent each domain on the basis of the following criteria. 1. The item has been written as a domain specific. 2. The item correlates with total score 0.25. 3. The item has been written down as domain specific. 2. The item correlates with total score 0.25 point. And 3. The, the 4 items in each domain has to have non-overlap in explicit content. Example 4 different body products, and 4 The four items have included two in the personal reaction format and two in the I'm lost. We also selected the alternative list of items by ignoring the first and third constants or constraints and attempting to maximize within the domain item correlation. However, this procedure did not lead to any appreciable differences in the result reported.